Welcome to the All Out Leadership Podcast, hosted by Pastor Erik, where each episode is uniquely designed to help you live all out by bringing you practical leadership from a biblical perspective delivered in 10 minutes or less. So whether you're a business leader, serving in ministry, or simply looking to grow in your leadership, this podcast is for you. Before we dive into this week's topic, make sure to subscribe to the podcast and download the show notes at eriklawson.com/podcast. And while you're at it, feel free to share the content on social media. Now, let's join Pastor Erik for this week's conversation.
Welcome to another edition of the All Out Leadership Podcast. We're in 2 Samuel chapter 17, 18, and we see David is fleeing from his son Absalom. Absalom throws a coup, overthrows the kingdom. Now, there are some people who actually stay behind to side with Absalom. David had a trusted counselor named Ahithophel. He stays behind and he sides with Absalom. And so what we see here is Absalom now presses into one of David's trusted advisors and he goes, "Hey, Ahithophel, give me some advice." And he initially gives some advice and Absalom goes, "Hey, that's good advice," and he follows that advice. But then he asks for advice on another matter, whether or not to flee and pursue, and how does he deal with his dad, David, who's fleeing. So Ahithophel actually gives him some really good advice. It's a brilliant strategy, and he says this. He goes, "Look, give me 12,000 men. I can overthrow him. I can pursue him before he's been able to gather, recollect, reassess, regroup, and I can surprise him and I can take him out and we'll have this taken care of once and for all." It was actually a brilliant tactic. So then Absalom then asks the advice of a man named Hushai, and he advises against it. Now, one thing Absalom did here, now he was rebellious, and he didn't have the Spirit of God behind it. He was ungodly, but he was actually pretty smart because he got multiple advice. Unfortunately, he listened to the wrong guy. So Hushai says, "Look, I advise against that. David is like a wild mother bear, and you don't want to attack him. He's been a man of war," and he discourages Absalom from following Ahithophel's advice. Now, unbeknownst to Absalom, Hushai actually was working as a double agent. He stayed behind to actually protect and defend David, working as a double agent, sending David particular messages. So Absalom sided with Hushai. Now, this is the point of the story. Ahithophel gave advice, and his advice was ignored. What do you do when you are an advisor, you're a counselor, you're on a staff, you give an opinion, you have an idea, you propose a project, and it gets rejected and turned down, and somebody else's idea is the one that goes with? How do you handle that, and how do you respond? Well, we're going to learn a lot from Ahithophel. Now, 2 Samuel 17, verse 23. Now, when Ahithophel saw that his advice was not followed, he saddled a donkey. A biblical word for that is an ass. It fits this picture. He saddled an ass and arose and went home to his house, to his city. And then he put his household in order and he hanged himself and died. Now, he killed himself. Now, he obviously went to the extreme of depression because his advice wasn't taken. Nobody accepted his project proposal. Somebody went with that particular idea for outreach. That person went with, and they didn't take my advice. Now, look, how you respond when your advice is not accepted really says a lot about who you are as a person. I have worked with people over the years now for 33 years in ministry, and I found this out. There are just people who put too much of their identity in their ideas. They put their identity in their proposals. They put their identity in their advice. Look, you can reject my idea. That didn't mean you rejected me. But there's that type of person, and that was Ahithophel. You rejected my idea, therefore you rejected me. He had way too much of himself attached into that. Now, in his defense, let's just make a little footnote. He might have actually just said, "I'm going to do the inevitable because I know this. My advice was ignored. David's going to prevail, and he is going to come back, and he's going to kill me. So I'm just going to do the inevitable and take care of that rather than wait around for the inevitable." That is a possibility, but I like my first proposal better because this is what I've seen. There are people who get hung up, just as Ahithophel, because somebody didn't take their advice. And often it ends to their end. It often ends to their demise because that person is just long-term not sustainable to work with. If every idea your feelings are attached to it, every time there's something that somebody didn't do the way you thought, didn't go the direction, and you're attached to that, look, nobody wants to work with you. You're exhausting, you're draining the team, and over time, you're more of a liability than you are an asset to that team because you're hanging everything up. Everybody has to dance around feelings. And look, at the end, it just kills things. It kills momentum, it kills energy, it kills morale, and often I've seen it kill people's opportunities inside of an organization because they didn't know how to separate their idea from their identity. Just remember this. You know what? Sometimes there is a better way than what you brought to the table. I'm the pastor of this church, Element Church. I bring ideas to the table all the time, but I'm smart enough to know my idea is not always the best idea. So here's how I start. I don't go, hey guys, this is what we're going to do. I go, hey, I have an idea. It might not even be a good idea, but let's see what you think. I throw out an idea. Then we fight and argue as a staff, which is actually my favorite part. I want not yes men around me. I want people who love a good fight. Well, that's good. Let's talk about that. Well, I could see it this way. And after, a time of discussing, I'll listen. And often I go, you know what? That idea is better than my idea. And here's what I found. It's not about having my idea. I want what's best for the church. And if it was my idea or not my idea, I don't care. I just want what's best for the church. So sometimes just know your way is not the best way. Now, it might trigger a better way. You might have brought an idea that when it was all done through collaboration, everybody goes, hey, we just took your idea and made it better. Way to go. So you contributed, but it didn't have to look just like you presented it. Sometimes there is another way to get the results that you want. There are many different ways to get to particular destinations. And so I don't get hung up on the road, the method. I'm looking for efficiency. I'm looking for cost effectiveness. I'm looking for the ROI. But look, if there's two different paths and they run parallel and they're both going to get us there and everybody likes this little path a little bit different because they like passing by that tree and that little scenery, I go, hey, if we get there about the same time for the same money, you know what? And it didn't go against biblical values, I'm okay with that. We'll try it. My way's better, but we'll go ahead and try that anyway because you're all happy, and that's just much easier to live with. Now, sometimes your leader gets it wrong. Absalom got it wrong in this particular case. How do you manage it and handle it when you get it wrong? Now, here's what I find sad is Ahithophel self-selected because maybe he just assumed David would have killed him when he got back. Well, what we just saw in the story of David in the previous context was he forgave Shimei. Maybe Ahithophel wouldn't have been put to death. Maybe David would have been gracious to him. So he made a wrong assumption as to the consequences of not getting it right. So look, your leader's going to get it wrong, but give her the benefit of the doubt that God is still in control of your life, not your leader, and just be mature in how you manage that. Now, let me just kind of biblically carry this out a little bit further. Why would Ahithophel betray David? Now, we know in 2 Samuel 23:34, when we read that Ahithophel had a son named Elam, we read in 2 Samuel 11:3 that Elam had a daughter named Bathsheba. Well, there you go. Ahithophel was the grandfather of Bathsheba, and we covered that story. So Ahithophel probably had unforgiveness and bitterness grow up because his great son-in-law and his granddaughter Uriah was murdered, Bathsheba was defiled, and so probably inside of there was latent bitterness. And Hebrews chapter 12, verse 15 says, looking carefully, lest anyone fall short of the grace of God, lest any root of bitterness spring up, cause trouble, and by this many become defiled. Many were hurt. In fact, tens of thousands of people lost their lives as the result of Ahithophel siding with David. Just know this, your bitterness doesn't just hurt you, it hurts many, many other people. So look, deal with it, take it to the cross. Remember, at the cross, everything is made clear. We forgive and we allow the cross to be the filter by which we look at people, leaders, and our circumstances.
Thank you for joining us on the All Out Leadership Podcast. We hope you gained new biblical insight that challenged you to grow in your leadership. If you've enjoyed this week's episode, we would love your help in getting the content out farther. You can help by subscribing to the podcast at eriklawson.com/podcast and telling others about it. Next week, Pastor Erik will be back with another episode. So until then, we hope you have a great week being an all-out leader.